Here they are. The first one we learned was that we should shift as a church from reaching people. Reaching people is a good thing, but what's better is making disciples. So moving from reaching people to making disciples. You're going to see that that's our commandment. We've been studying that, and in this Great Commission, you're going to see that it specifically says not just reach people with the gospel, but make disciples of people. All right? People that are mature disciples. The second shift we talked about was from informing people, and you may come on Sunday morning thinking, well, I'm here to learn information, and that's part of what we do, but instead of just informing people, what we really want to do is equip people. If you look at Ephesians chapter 4, we look at that, it said that the job description for every pastor is to equip the saints to do the work in the body of Jesus Christ, because you and I are the body together. And so from just informing people, we would like to equip people to actually do these things that we're called to do. The third shift we talked about was moving from programs, just having good programs, to purpose. And that talks about being united in our purposes, trying to actually achieve things rather than just successfully complete one more program in the church. Programs are good, but they're tools. Purpose is better than just programming. Finally, we've begun to talk about going from activity to relationships. From activity, busy, something to do all the time. Are we a good church? Yes, because we're extremely busy. Well, that's not really the definition of a good church. The definition of a good church is a church that's not just active and busy, but it's a church that's actually building relationships, because then the busyness is directed toward each other, growing each other, and toward those purposes we talked about. Last week specifically, we talked about aligning our ministries, our small groups, and all those things so that we move toward that one big purpose, which we're going to see in this Great Commission, which is what? You can read it up there, or you can just probably repeat it by now. Making disciples who make disciples. There you go. That's our big purpose. And we get that from the Great Commission that I'm going to read to you momentarily, I promise. Matthew 28. Today specifically, we're going to continue talking about moving from activity into relationship, but specifically we're going to look at what a relational small group looks like. All right, what is a relational small group? What are the elements that make that up? What composes that group? All right, so all of this is based on the Great Commission. So let's take a look at that. Matthew 28, 18 through 20. Jesus is giving his final instructions to his disciples. If you've ever been in a hospice house or in a hospital room or in a home where somebody is about to go away, and they are trying to tell you something, and you know it must be really significant and really important because they know they're not going to be around much longer. Maybe you were in that situation with your father or your mother, your grandparent, or somebody you loved. And if that person just tried to struggle to get that last bit of advice or that last, here's how you should live your life, or I want to thank you, or I love you, whatever it is, wouldn't you really lean in close and try to hear those words, because that's the last thing they want to communicate to you. That's kind of what this is for us with Jesus. Now, Jesus died and rose again, and Jesus is still with us, and that's part of this promise. But to those 12 disciples, that's what this was. This was like his last will and testament, his will for them, his commandment for them to be done. And here's what he said. Jesus came near, and he said to them, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. What I'm about to tell you has all authority. Listen carefully, he says. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit,
teaching them to observe everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So he starts it off. He says, I've got all authority from heaven and earth, on heaven and earth. All power to do what I want you to do is here. You have these marching orders. If anybody asks you, why are you doing this? You say, because my commander told me to. I've told you to do this. He tells them what to do, which is what? Go and make disciples. Disciples who make disciples. That's the idea. Go. Eat, right? We use that little acronym. Evangelize them, let them know the gospel. Baptize them, that's assimilate them into the church. Make them be a part of the church. Help them feel at home. Put them to work. Pour into them, have them pour into you. Assimilate them. And then teach them, but not just informationally, in a way that transforms them and equips them. So he starts off by saying, I have authority to tell you these things. Then he tells us these things, make disciples who make disciples. And then he finishes it up with, don't forget, I am with you always. I've given you this authority and I'm going to stay with you. But that's your walking orders as a Christian. That's what we're supposed to do. So last week we talked about aligning our ministries and our committees and our teams to achieve that one big purpose of making disciples who make disciples. And we said that the 4 G's we talked about, we've been talking about these for a long time, how we gather together and we glorify God and we grow and we go. Those things are our strategy for achieving that one big thing, making disciples. Making disciples. That's how we do it. We gather together, we glorify God together, we grow each other, we influence each other, we pick each other up where we're weak, and we strengthen each other where we're strong, and we get better. And then we go locally, regionally, globally. Good to see the Mosses back. Others who were on the trip, I'm not sure if the Privets are here today, but so many people just went to Honduras and did wonderful ministry there. They went. They gave us an example of go, go, go. This is how we do it. This is how we do it. We go and we make disciples who make disciples. So this week we want to talk about what does that kind of relational small group, because that's how Jesus did it. Remember, we've talked about that. Jesus had throngs of people coming to him. And while our nature would be to say, great, the numbers are great, we're really successful, Jesus' nature was this. Hey, I want y'all to know this is going to be hard. That's what he told them. He would use some of his hardest sayings, like, you're going to have to hate your father and mother compared to how much you love me. Oh, it's going to cost you greatly. If you want to follow me, you must lay down your life for me. If you're going to follow me, you have to be willing to take up your cross and die each day and follow me. Do what I tell you to do. He would make those kind of commandments when too many people were coming because he wanted to winnow it down to a group that was really serious. And there were 2 particular groups. There were his 12 disciples. We know about them. And within those 12 disciples, there were 3 guys that were especially close to him. And so he gave us that model. Great things can be done in large groups, but greater things can be done when we break that large group into smaller groups so that we can really get to know each other. Did you know you really can't, even a crowd this size, and it's not, we're not thousands of people or anything, but, hundreds of people. You can't take hundreds of people and really know those people. But you can take 12, you can take 10, you can take 6, you can take 3, and you can really get some things done. If those 3 then make 3, those 12 then make 12. That's God's plan for discipleship. So here are the components of a small group that looks like that. The kind of group that Jesus says, hey, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to build my church. The components of a small group are shepherding, teaching, and then authenticity and accountability. This is according to this DiscipleShift book, and I believe this. I believe it's scriptural. Let's take a look at each one of those elements. First of all, shepherding. Shepherding. All right, we know a lot about shepherding. Shepherding's all in the Bible. It was a shepherding culture. And so, of course, Jesus talked about shepherding, but shepherding was talked about in the Old Testament too. The most famous place it's talked about is the 23rd Psalm. You want to say that with me? It's not on the screen, but I bet some of you can just say that with me. And if I mess it up, you help me, okay? All right. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Right? You know that psalm. You've heard that psalm at funerals. You've heard it in Sunday school. You've heard it in worship services. You've heard it preached. And you know that that's talking about shepherding. It's written by David, who would be the king of Israel. But before he was the king of Israel, he would be a shepherd for his father Jesse in the fields. And he learned so much by being a shepherd. There's a book I love, an old book, older than me, I believe. It's called A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23 by Philip Keller. And he was a man who studied agriculture, and he studied sheep and all these things. And he would come back and he would write books that pointed us toward concepts in the Bible that he learned from watching the way nature worked and people worked with nature, particularly in this case, shepherds and their sheep. And he talks in here about all those things that the 23rd Psalm tells us. It tells us that if the Lord is my shepherd, I don't have to worry. Because what? He takes care of me. He takes care of me like a shepherd takes care of sheep. He leads me in the right places. When I'm going wrong, he can take that shepherd's crook and lead me back or keep me from going into that bad place or get me back on the righteous path when I want to stray. If I have a disease or I'm infested with insects or something like that, he's going to put oil on my head. He's going to lead me to green pastures, places where I should be eating. He's going to lead me beside waters that are good for me, not stagnant pools, but places where I can get good, fresh water. When the winter comes, he's going to make sure I have something to eat. When the summer's hot, he's going to make sure that he gives me a haircut and gets some of that wool off me so I'm not so heavy. If I fall down, he picks me up. Even when I walk through difficult times, even the valley of the shadow of death, I don't have to fear because he's my protector. All those things are shepherding. And I know that when we think about shepherds in church, we typically think about pastors. And pastors are told to be shepherds. Absolutely, we're told to be shepherds. Not only the 23rd Psalm talks about shepherding, but there are many passages that talk about shepherding. 1 Peter 5:2 talks about how pastors should be shepherds. You can look that one up. Acts 20:28 talks about pastors being shepherds. There's a passage in the Old Testament that specifically talks about bad shepherding. And let's look at what bad shepherding looks like. Here's what bad shepherding is. Ezekiel 34:1-6. These are the people who are supposed to be the shepherds of Israel in the Old Testament. In other words, these are their priests he's talking about. The equivalent of a modern day pastor. And he says this, "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel." This is Ezekiel providing them with what God had told them. He is confronting those who were supposed to be leaders of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the Lord God says to the shepherds. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding not the sheep, but feeding themselves. Shouldn't the shepherds feed their flock? You eat the fat, shepherd. You wear the wool, and you butcher the fattened animals, but you do not tend the flock. See, the pastor's supposed to feed the sheep, not fleece the sheep. That's what he's telling them. Verse 4, you have not strengthened the weak, you have not healed the sick, bandaged the injured, brought home the strays, or sought the lost. Instead, you have ruled them with violence and cruelty. They lorded it over the people like they were more important. They took the title of shepherd or priest as an honor, not a duty. They were scattered, talking about the people, for lack of a shepherd. They became food for all the wild animals while they were scattered. My flock went astray on all the mountains and every high hill. My flock was scattered over the face of the whole earth, and there was no one searching or seeking for them. Clearly, pastors, priests are supposed to be shepherds. But in every small group, there should be shepherds. If you take, as I said, a few hundred people and you try to be a shepherd over several hundred people, unless there's some degree of organization, you're going to fail. Remember how I said you can't really get to know even a couple of hundred or certainly 400 people? You can't get to know everything about them the way that a shepherd would. You can try, doesn't mean don't try. But what about instead, if you have a system, if you shift your thinking from, hey, that one guy or those 3 or 4 people are supposed to shepherd all of those people, the ones that show up, which is probably 400 something in our particular church. You got to remember, people take turns going to church, right? Everybody's not here every week. And so, 400 or 500, I would say, is how many people we really have coming right now. You can say 3 or 4 people are supposed to completely be the shepherds over those people, or you can say, yes, those leaders, me, the others, should shepherd the best we can, but we need to make sure that everybody knows somebody on a little more intimate level than that. And so that's why we have things like Sunday school. Sunday school is the longest existing and frankly the best small group that I know. Now there are whole churches, great churches, that don't have Sunday school, and that's fine too, as long as they have something like it, some sort of small group setting. And I've been here for a good while now, and I can tell you this, that there are people here who are here every week or 2 out of 3 weeks or 3 out of 4 weeks, and you don't know each other. Here's how I know that. Because somebody will come up to me and say, hey, do you know somebody that does this or does that in church? Or do you know somebody who can change my tires, or somebody who can fix my house, or somebody who can advise me on this or that hobby or something? And I'll say, oh, yeah. John Smith is a member of our church and he does that. And they'll go, who? Well, John Smith, he's here every week. I don't know John Smith. That's happened so many times. And you know why? It's simple. Because John Smith sits over here and they sit over there. And you don't get to know each other in this kind of setting. Now, I'll know John Smith and, Mary Jones, call it, And I know both of them are fine people and they love people and they're easy to get along with. I think, well, they'd really love each other if they knew each other. But they just don't, because they don't sit in the same place. And they come in on Sunday morning when we gather like this, and they sit in their own areas and they talk to the people they know the best who sit in those areas, because we're Baptists and we tend to sit on the same pews, don't we? I used to make fun of that until I realized in our staff meetings we do the same thing. That's just, we're creatures of habit. That's why we need to meet in smaller groups. That's why you're missing out if you're just coming to this assembly. You're missing out. Sunday school is set up for that. But there are other groups. You can set up a group that goes to your home, or meets in a restaurant for breakfast, or meets for coffee, or just goes walking together, or knitting together, or whatever it is you like to do together, tailgate together, whatever it is you like to do, you set it up around that thing, and voila, you've got a small group if you meet regularly, right? And there you go. You learn to shepherd each other. And you can do that a whole lot better in a small group than I can ever do that for you. You can really get to know each other much better that way. Shepherding should be a part of every small group. I'm just going to brag for a minute. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but we have some older ladies classes. And when I say older, that just means my age and up. Whatever my age is, my age and up is always older. But we have some classes that have been together a long time, and they love each other. And they check on each other by phone. If somebody's sick, I know somebody from that class is going to call me and say, pray for so-and-so because she's sick. Or did you know so-and-so's in the hospital? And no, I didn't know that. And I can go see them or call them and check on them. Because those ladies keep up with each other. And some of them have been doing it for 20, 30 years. And they have formed tight bonds, friendships. They take each other to the doctor. They know each other's children. They pray for them and grandchildren. That's a wonderful thing. If you want to do that in Sunday school, that's a great thing. If you want to do that in some other sort of small group, that's a great thing. If I can help you with that, if Robert can help you with that, if Michael can help you with that, we are happy to help you with that if you need to know a little more. But shepherd each other. You can do that better in a smaller setting. Shepherding is a component of every small group. Here's the second component, teaching. Well, that's right out of the Great Commission. Teaching them to observe all things I have commanded you. Yes, I do that on Sunday morning, but that also happens in small groups and arguably happens better in small groups. I know people that they get up in age and they just can't go somewhere for 2 or 3 hours at a time. They need to get home because their knee hurts or their hip hurts or they just can't stand up that long, or they need to rest because it's an effort to get up and get ready and, go to church. And some of those people say, you know what, Pastor Mike, I can only handle one thing on a day. And they'll say, no offense, but I'm going to go to Sunday school. And I'm not going to go to worship. And maybe I'll watch that at home or watch it later. Now, my preference would be that you be here for everything. I love to have you here. That's great. It's wonderful. And I think there's a benefit from us all being together physically like this. It encourages each other. Hebrews 10 talks about not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together in that kind of group. But I totally get it. If you're 80-something years old and you can only do one of those things, and you say, I'm going to go to Sunday school because those are my people, I totally support that. You do that. Because there is so much to be gained by that. And I love you just as much if you're doing that, if you're watching from home, or if you know somebody that left this morning, you tell them, hey, Pastor Mike said, thank you for being here for Sunday school. Because that teaching in that small group with people that you really know, can be so valuable as opposed to this. One person talking and a bunch of people listening. Because in a small group, you can be together and you can ask questions and answers. Get answers about the Bible and life application. You know, how does that apply in my life? How did you deal with that in your life? You can get real stories that come out of that. Somebody can say, oh, you're going through that with your grandchild? I went through that with my grandchild. When you get those real stories from other people, it really helps in a way that maybe in this setting you don't quite get it because you know those people. You remember they went through that. The Word of God, the Spirit of God, and the people of God all come together in that kind of small group setting. That's the next slide, guys. If you'll just think about how that works in a small group, there are so many benefits to that. So many benefits. Again, whether it's on Sunday morning or whether it's some other time, I want us to do all those things, and some of you will want to do both of those things. Now, I've seen good teachers who were master teachers, and they were lecturers, and they were wonderful at it, and people got a lot out of it, and that's fine. But there ought to be some way for people to ask you questions. If it's not in the class, maybe it's you meet after the class with somebody who has a question. Again, you go and get coffee with that person, teacher, or you have a group chat or a text, you know, where you can ask questions and get feedback and find out, hey, I want to know a little bit more about that. Let me ask you a question. What do you think is more effective? Our Sunday school grew to 100 people. Or our Sunday school started off with 10 people. And in the last 5 years, 10 more Sunday schools grew out of that class. Which do you think would be more effective? There's a place for both, but I believe that when people can really get to know each other, that there can be a lot more intimate information shared. People are willing to do that with 10 people more than they're willing to do that with 100 people. Some people wouldn't dare speak in front of 100 people, much less ask a question that they have. And here's the third aspect, authenticity and accountability. So you have the idea of teaching people. You have the idea of shepherding people, but also an element that needs to be present in a small group is the element of authenticity and accountability. This is biblical. Listen to Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up. But pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person alone keep warm? You ever heard of hypothermia? There you go. All right. Verse 12, if someone overpowers one person, 2 can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Right? You take 3 strands of rope and you braid them together, and it's a whole lot tougher to break that than it is to break 1 strand of rope. It can hold a whole lot more weight. That matters. It's really talking about real friendship and real fellowship. That's what authenticity is. That's what accountability is. You love somebody enough to tell them the truth, to open yourself up to that person, and to let them open himself or herself up to you. Galatians 6, 1 and 2 says, brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted, so that you don't come off thinking, oh, I'm so great because I just helped somebody, because that's when you'll fall, right? Do it with a gentle spirit for their good, not for your own ego. Carry one another's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. Beautiful picture of people coming together and helping each other when one is in wrong, in sin. Romans 12, 15 and 16, rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. I don't like to cry in front of people. But there are times when I have. There are times when you need to do that with other people. Just be real with those people. And if you're real with them, they'll be more real with you. Celebrate together and weep together. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud. Instead, associate with the humble. Don't be wise in your own estimation. In other words, don't think, that's great for other people, but I don't need that. That would be being wise in your own estimation. John Donne said, no man is an island. And he was right. He's right. What are some of the benefits of that? Well, we gain experience without having to go through some of the things that other people have gone through, right? If I've had a situation come up in my job, when I was in my 20s or in my 30s, and I got mad and I handled it the wrong way, if I'm in a group of 10 or 12 people that I care about, and one of those people says, hey, can you pray for me, or can anybody help me? I've got this situation at work, and I flash back and go, oh yeah, I remember that, and I handled it terribly. Let me tell you what I did wrong. Fritz Hollings was the senator from South Carolina when I was growing up for a long time, as senators tend to be. And I remember something, I don't know if it's original with him, but one thing he said was, there's no education in the second kick of a mule. Right? First time a mule kicks you, you can learn something from that. But you don't need the second time. That's just getting kicked. And so if I can say, hey, when I was 35, I got kicked by a mule, don't do that. You benefit from that. If you can say, hey, Pastor Mike, I know this thing's coming up, but, there are these people that feel this way, these people that feel that way, and you can fill me in. Guess what? I don't always hear all that stuff. Happened not long ago. Had an issue in church, and I thought, everything's just hunky-dory. Everybody's in agreement on that. And then somebody who knew a little more than me came to me and said, guess what? You don't know everything about that. Oh, well, thank you. Then I did not have to learn the hard way. Right? That we can benefit each other that way. If we're willing to be authentic, if we're willing to be real with each other and communicate with each other, and I'm telling you that is more likely to happen in a group of 8, 10 people, maybe even 3, 4 people, than it is for somebody to come up here today and say it in front of everybody when they don't know everybody. All right? Now, there are limits. There are things that maybe should be shared one-on-one. You don't want to embarrass anybody. You have to exercise some discretion about that. But all these things, I tell you, to help you understand the value, yes, of this, but also of being in a small group of people. That's what Jesus did. That's how he grew the church to what it is today. It started off with 12. And the way we can grow is to start it off with small groups within our larger body. So if you're not in a small group right now, if you're one of those people who only comes to worship, thank you for doing that. That's great. And again, you may be one of those people that can only do one thing, and if you choose to be here for this part of it, that's great. But if you can, if you're physically capable of doing both, you're missing out. If you're not plugged in to a small group so that you can help somebody grow and somebody can help you to grow, because that's biblical and it's smarter to do it that way. Let's pray. Lord,